Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Vinny Costa, editor of Street Muscle Magazine, and your host of the RodCAST, the all-encompassing car show where we talk about all things automotive. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Greg Acosta, editor of Engine Labs and the all-around tech guru. What's up, Greg?
Hey, Vinny. What's happening?
What's going on, man? How are you?
I had to have coffee for it, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm doing well. How about you?
Good, man. Good. Ready to get into another fun-filled episode of the RodCast like we do.
Yep.
We're constantly toying with our format and the way that we're shooting things. So if you guys have any notes, drop them in the comment section below. As you can see behind me, I got Old Glory. I really like it, but it's a little change of pace from what you guys are used to seeing. So drop me a comment in the comment section. Greg, your background looks stellar as always, my friend.
I don't know about the blue. I'm still not sold. I mean, I'm sold on it because I paid money for it, but I'm not sold on the color.
I like it, man. It looks fantastic. You got the cool sound deadening things on the wall. You got RodCast Live Friday at noon. Plug for us, Friday at noon every week. This is the weekly automotive podcast. But yeah, so anyways, moving on. We have a very special guest this week, Greg. Good friend of yours and now a good friend of mine. You guys will recognize him from a couple episodes back when we had him on with Jeff Smith. Of course, we're referring to none other than Billy Godbold, the Valve Train Engineering Group Manager at Comp Cams. Let's go ahead and bring him on. So Billy, the last time we had you on the show, we talked a lot about the low shock valve train technology, specifically with relation to Project Spinal Tap. And that was fantastic. And everyone at home, you can read all about it on enginelabs.com. But on this episode, I'd like to discuss something we didn't have a chance to on that episode. And that's like your personal history, your background. And, while many people know you as the cam cutting physicist today, I understand you come from somewhat humble beginnings out on a farm. Can we start there?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that you have to understand. When I started grad school, there's a lot of people I went to school with that thought that I was some part of a quota. Like that FSU hadn't graduated any rednecks, and hey, we found one, and we're going to bring him in. So the idea, like when I walk into a NASCAR shop or a lot of our small customers, I speak fluent Southern. I am from literally the poorest county in Mississippi when I grew up. So my father and my mother's family, my father's family, they were all farmers in northern Mississippi in the Delta region where the Mississippi River went across. So I grew up. If I was lucky, I was on a tractor. There was times I was spot spraying on a motorcycle. I've gone through and I've literally hoed cuckleburs out of cotton. So, I really and truly am, that's not an act. That's not part of it. When somebody says Billy speaks with a Southern accent, like I do have the birth certificate that backs up my accent.
Well, so you're from what county in Mississippi?
Tunica County. So if you go south from Memphis, the first county you run into is DeSoto, and the second county that you run into is Tunica. And it was really, the casinos came about the time I went off to boarding school. The casinos came in town, and they went from the poorest county to not the poorest county. But like one of the things I'm most proud of, my mom taught public school in the poorest county in Mississippi for years and years and years. So you can imagine the makeup of that. Her family wasn't super happy about it, but as far as somebody who's really made a difference in people's lives, my mom's my hero in that point.
That's awesome, man. I'm curious though. I mean, when you say Tunica County, Mississippi, that's not exactly, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not exactly like a hot rodding mecca. So what took you from, like a farmland out there to, helping people go really, really fast?
One of the things that I spent about a week with a friend in New Zealand, and it kind of reminded me of growing up. When we were in Christchurch, New Zealand, if something broke down, you went to somebody who's an electrician, you went to something like that. You had to constantly keep your equipment running, and you didn't have time to rely on the factory because that would be, 2 weeks away. So growing up in rural Mississippi, with farmers, there's 2 times a year they're hypercritical. You've got to get the crop in the ground at a certain time when it's just right, and you have to get the crop out of the ground. You have to harvest it at a certain time. During that planting time, and certainly during that harvesting time, if something mechanical breaks, you fix it on the spot. If that means baling wire and duct tape, if that means JB Weld, if that means welding something, if that means helicoiling, I mean, nothing is at all off the table. And so growing up in that environment, so I worked on the farm till I was at least 15, so 16 probably. If you can imagine working in that environment, it's a very, very hands-on, very, very mechanical side. I've always had the passion for that. My dad was successful enough at farming that when I was probably about 10 years old, he gave me a little sailboat, and it had a 2-horsepower motor. And I don't remember how old I was, but I learned to like shove things under the motor to bring the prop out a little bit to get more RPM. I learned where I had the cover off. So I'd be going across the lake backwards, the cover off, with a hammer on the mag trying to adjust the timing, a screwdriver adjusting the rich and lean, and a pair of pliers that I'd rip the governor off the thing on. So, I've been into this stuff. Me and my friends tore cars apart. I tore my dad's boat engine all the way apart one day when he left me in there like a playpen. If you gave me something, I had to take it apart and see how it worked. And ever so often, I'd actually get it back together again. I mean, it was probably like a 1-2% thing, but there were things that I did get back together after I took them apart. I just wanted to take everything apart and figure out how it worked.
I'm curious because that's like you mentioned, a very hands-on thing, right? It's only something that you can learn. I mean, I guess you could learn in theory in a book, but it's something that you really have to get your hands dirty doing. But you also mentioned that your mother was a school teacher. So were you particularly studious at that time?
Oh, that's the funny. I failed 3rd grade. So, you have to understand I'm like the ugly duckling of scholastic stories. My dad literally cried because he had my dad got his master's degree in mathematics in 5 years. He was this brilliant mathematician. My mother has a doctorate in education and like 2 master's degrees. She is a brilliant, brilliant woman. And somehow together they had this stupid son, crayon eating, can't stay out of trouble, not very good. I still can't spell cat if you spot me the K and the T. So there's all this goofiness. But when I got to be probably about 6th grade or so, I started noticing that I still made D's and everything else, but I started making B's in math. And then I started making A's in math. And in my class, it wasn't very big because we probably didn't have 25 people, but they gave a subject area award in each subject. And I always thought that was funny. And then like one time I won, then one year I won in math and I won in science, you know what I mean? And then some of my science projects went to state, and there was, like by the time geometry came around, I went through the whole year of geometry and I didn't miss a single question, not a homework question, not a quiz, not a test. Just, I had 100 in geometry, and that really freaked the teacher out. I thought you were supposed to get the answers right. She seemed to think that was odd. So when that started happening, my family got really concerned. It's like, hey, this kid's kind of goofy. So they sent me off to boarding school in Chattanooga, a little school called Baylor, really, really prestigious boarding school. And I went there and kind of the same deal. I made it through all the humanities, but through the science and math, I was really, really good there too. And then I went to Rhodes College here in Memphis, and I was really, really good there too. And
you said you were kind of like a troublemaker, though. Is that part of the reason that they sent you to the boarding school as well?
Yeah, I mean, before it was legal for me to drink, I really thought that was kind of fun. I'm sort of an experimentalist at heart, so I always wanted to find out, how fast cars would go. And, police officers really don't like you finding that out on the street. How much trouble you can get into and not get thrown in jail. It's all this pressing limits and stuff. So as a teenager, I'm very fortunate now. Now my youngest daughter's about to graduate from college this year. So she's got a couple months left and she'll have her undergrad. So my kids are past this stage. So I can talk about it a little bit now, but but I probably wasn't the best role model. There was good reasons why moms didn't want their kids hanging out with me years, because I was just a little bit stupid.
Well, you couldn't be that unintelligent. But I'm curious though, like if the rest of your scholastic program you weren't too interested in, but you excelled at math. Is it because you had like a natural aptitude for it, or is it one of those things where you did well, and then somebody kind of encouraged you and said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this math thing," and then you just you leaned into it, or was it a combination?
Well, I didn't like the whole school thing. I didn't think that was going to be part of my life. So even when I was at boarding school, it was about the time Michael Jordan did that thing where he jumped at the free throw line and dunked and had that big shot and they put on his shoes and everything. Well,
Yeah.
like I thought that was super cool. So I went down to the gym at boarding school and I started on the 8 foot. And I spent about a week learning to dunk on the 8 foot. And I went to 9 foot. And I got where I could get there. And then I went to the 10 foot with the mini tramp, and I went to the 10 foot with the tennis ball. And like a couple of months went by me trying to figure out how I could dunk like Michael Jordan. I wanted to be cool. Problem is, I'm like 5'11" maybe now, and I have no hops. I'm not this fast twitch, Sky. And I realized that Michael Jordan could sit on the couch and eat bonbons for the next 30 years. He would still be able to dunk. And I could go to the gym every night for the next 30 years. I still wouldn't be able to. At the same time, I was probably number one in my class in honors physics and AP calculus. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that my gifts were not to be an NFL or NBA or anything like that. That just wasn't where I'd been touched. But when I tell you that my math was good, my math was so much better than my verbal. I scored I think it was around a 550 verbal and a 750 math out of, on the SAT. And
Wow.
So when I applied to colleges, you'd get these call back from the college, people, recruiters, right? And so like the first call went, like the first question was, "Are you a native born English speaker?" And I went, "Well, my last name Godbold, that's a little bit weird." "Okay, yeah, that's fine." Well, this happened the second time. This happened the third time. The third time somebody asked me if I was a native born English speaker, I'm like, "Excuse me, ma'am, why in the world do I keep getting asked if I'm a native born English speaker?" And then she's like, well, Mr. Godbold, we've never seen anybody with a 200-point spread between their English and mathematics. And so we just assumed that you had to be from India or something, and you just didn't speak English, and you were just trying to
Oh
pick
man.
a Christmas tree. So I had fun with that. The next one that asked us, the next lady calls up. She goes, a couple of questions in. She, sure enough, "Mr. Godbold, are you a native-born English speaker?" I said, in my best Southern accent, "No, ma'am. I'm from Mississippi." I said, "I speak fluent Southern and redneck and several dialects of East Tennessee, but no English."
Oh man.
She just bawled. But yeah, so I don't
So
know.
is that kind of how you landed on what school you're going to go to? I mean, obviously, you had recruiters calling you because you did so well on the math.
It was sort of the other way around. Most of my teachers at Baylor thought that my weaknesses in the liberal arts side were because that my education was so weak in the liberal arts. So instead of sending me to a engineering college, they really pushed me to go to a liberal arts and sciences college and give it 2 years to try to build up that side. So, I did have to read a whole lot going to Rhodes College. That's where the new Supreme Court nominee, she graduated about a year after me from there. So it's a very, very good liberal arts college in history, humanities, all that kind of stuff.
Well, tell me about your time in college. Like, what was that time like for you? Were you just really focused on your studies, or were you kind of still doing your rebellious thing?
I kind of went back and forth, because you have to understand that in 87, I'd gotten a Jeep, and about 88 or 89, I'd totaled it. And then when I rebuilt it, I put I put the regular engine back into it. But I'm like, the small block Chevy fit in here really nice. So about halfway through my freshman year, the motor was acting funny. And one of my buddies, a guy named Toby Mangum, we've been friends since like literally since we were born, you know, like in playpen playing together. He had a small block Chevy in his little shop area. I said, what if I come in here and we rip this motor out and put that motor in? And we went in there, and somebody had taken engines apart and done stuff with. So I spent about, I thought it was going to take about 3 weeks. It was probably about 9 weeks changing the 4-cylinder out on my Jeep into a small block Chevy. And I still remember we took the hood off and standing on the firewall with a sledgehammer, knocking, you know, the air conditioner was gone, everything like that, knocking the firewall back to move the engine as far back as I possibly could, you know, to get the center of gravity where I wanted it. So we had the engine, you know, I had the skid plate moved down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. I had the firewall knocked back about 3 inches. And I was good enough at creative interpretation of the rules at the time that I used to take that Jeep all around Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee and enter it in the stock V8 4-wheel drive mud tracks. Now, how I convinced somebody that was a 304 AMC with the distributor on the back, you know, but I'd put the JC Whitney, the shorty headers on there. I had a Comp Cams 268 camshaft, former intake, you know, 650 or 750 double vacuum secondary carburetor. But I'd run the exhauster and I put 2 big Sears muzzlers. Both of them, you know, it's like Sears, like make and model. And I'm trying to figure out what's the biggest thing you have. So I figured, okay, F350 with the 460 single, you know. So I had 2 of the F350 mufflers taking up the whole bottom of this thing to quiet it down. And you could pull in and tell everybody, you know, go in the stock class. And until this thing took off, they'd think it was a stock, you know, Jeep. And, you know, oh, I just slaughtered at that deal. So that was a lot
That's
of fun.
hilarious. So you
But
were
I mean,
still
you know,
making time for hot rodding, even
right.
while you were like in your undergrad program.
Yeah, it was really neat because one of the other things that was super cool is like after a couple of years, they realized I was really kind of good at physics. And they're like, you know, most of the stuff with physics, you don't have the devices to make your experiments. So you know, I'm like, well, I'll take a couple of engineering courses over the summer. And my advisor said, make sure you take some machine shop classes too. You need to learn how to do machine shop work. And so what was funny is you know, you have to understand, I'm still not totally recovered from being a little bit of a hooligan. I'm like, you know, I have plenty of money for college. I don't have money for beer. So I've got to have beer money. So I ripped out, just to give you an idea how my mind works, I go to the machine shop section of the phone book and I rip out the 3 pages of machine shops in the Memphis area. And I grab a handy map, if you remember those things where you actually go to the address. I got hired, you know, AAA told me they didn't need me. I went to Ace Machine second. Ace Machine hired me and had me work for them a couple of summers. I worked for Lee Merritt at Ace Machine Shop. And you know, I'm going over there learning the machine stuff. First day I'm moving steel around from one rack to another. But by the end of the first summer, I was programming. They had the first Vidal 4020 in Memphis. I was programming the Vidal. I was programming the Herco.
Yeah, I was curious. You know, even though you studied physics, I was wondering that if you ever got into engineering as well. I guess that answers that. But were you ever tempted to study that instead of physics, or did that always have your heart?
I loved the engineering. Frustrated me at that time, and you know, my youngest son is an engineer. He's a PhD student at Georgia Tech.
Very cool.
And it's a lot different now. He's studying combustion. He's a rock star over there. Working on an SAE paper. Just, you know, couldn't be prouder of him. But when I looked at engineering, I saw those guys as more like guys who bought mathematical tools at the Snap-on truck and just hit whatever tool, whatever problem. Oh, it's this problem. I use this hammer, and they just grab that hammer and go whack it. Now, my son has taken honors physics. He's taught honors physics lab and stuff like that. So he's as much a physicist as an engineer. You know, he's just degree says engineering. But at the time, and I think that's gotten a lot better, but at the time I just thought the engineers were too much. You do it this way because that's how you do it. Where when you go into physics, one of the the motto of the Latin Royal Society is nullius in verba, which means take nothing for words, or basically it's take nothing for granted. Don't believe what somebody tells you. So like when they told us the speed of light was 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, that we actually took a rotating mirror and a laser and ran with mirrors, ran light all around this laser all over the halls. And you could measure what angle change there was on this mirror from the time it went and then hit the mirror, split, and came back. And so we actually measured the speed of light.
That's awesome.
It's like you do stuff like that. So you're actually, nobody's telling you this stuff. You're actually looking at it and learning it. So I love physics. I wouldn't trade it for the world, because understanding not what to do, but why. I was much more interested in why than what.
Right. So you're there, you're studying all the whys, right?
Right. What's really going on? What's the really deep whys?
What at that time, what was your grand scheme? What was your plan? You were studying this you had to have an ultimate goal. What was that?
You would think that I would, but I'm not sure that I did. It seemed like it was like, I wanted to be the best physicist I could be. And that was easy to say what that meant at each step, up until the time I was about to get my PhD. And I'm one of the few guys who actually ever quit a program after finishing comps. So, I finished my comps. I had 2 more classes to go before I dropped out with my master's degree from Florida State. I had a PhD fellowship. It would have been about 3 more years, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do after that. And the superconducting super collider had just been defunded in Texas, and they imploded that whole big tunnel so it couldn't get started back again. This is a place much bigger than CERN today. Just a tremendous facility. And I probably got to the point where I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it. Most of my path would have put me toward being a physics professor, and I didn't know if that's really what I wanted to do. My PhD thesis was going to be on the octopole state of platinum. So that's where you hit platinum, and instead of, normally it would split into like a barbell, that'd be a dipole. And then sometimes it splits into a clover leaf, which would be a quadrupole. Most nuclei will go from a quadrupole to hexapole. So it'll look like a clover leaf and then have a up and down. But platinum, because of the way the shells are arranged, that isn't a low energy state. It will go into an 8-pole. So imagine that clover leaf split at a certain angle. So part of the clover leaf, 4 going up and 4 going down. And my research was taking hydrogen and running into a thin full of platinum and watching how things scattered off of it. And I guess there was one time when I'm trying to figure out, we're running at 14 million electron volts, like 0.98 C, the speed of light, with this hydrogen beam hitting this platinum full. And I'm sitting there kind of scratching my head, and I'm doing quick numbers. I'm like, well, could this happen naturally on Earth? And it's like, well, no way. Can it happen in the sun? At the core of the sun? And you're like, well, probably not. Then you're like, is there any place in the Milky Way it could happen? Well, okay, if there's a black hole in the center of the Milky Way, you could get enough energy to create what I'm studying. And I'm like, I'm going to spend the next 4 years studying something that can't happen unless you're in a black hole or thermonuclear war. And neither of those sounds good, And the only thing, we were pretty sure what was going to happen. So it wasn't even disproving. If it did go to the hexapole before it went to octopole, that would be earth shattering, because it would change the atomic model. But everybody was pretty sure that it wouldn't, that it'd just do like it was supposed to do. And it did, I don't know. That's kind of that was one of those kind of life-changing things. And I thought about, well, hey, I'm really good at math. I'll go into nuclear medicine, So when I left Florida State, left Tallahassee to come back home toward Memphis. My first wife really wanted to be by her mom. And so that was one of those things. We'd had our first son. So we're going to go back to Memphis, and I was going to go work for one of the nuclear medicine places. I was going to go work for Baptist or Methodist Hospital. Man, that stuff's sad. People who are going through radiation therapy, that's not something you just do for the fun of it. And so that was a real change of heart. And I kind of got, for a little bit, I was probably a little bit like, what the heck am I going to do with my life? And it's
Right.
weird because I actually worked for probably about six, so I'm back in Memphis. I have a wife, I have a young son, I have no job, and I don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? So I'm like,
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you touched on it a moment ago with the Super Collider being defunded. It was almost like you were trying to enter a career field that was flooded with people who were more experienced than you.
yes, to give you an idea, there were 2,000 people that their major source of funding was 2,000 physicists. Their major source of funding was a superconducting supercollider. There were 200 good jobs that came up each year. It really didn't take the best mathematician in the world to realize that was 10 years of funk, right? So it's like, this is not, this is bad, and so that's why I was looking at medicine, because I didn't think many people would make that change.
Well, working in the field of like theoretical physics, like
Mhm.
uh, that's a pretty narrow field, right? Like you have education, medicine, and I mean, and those are all contingent on funding from like an outside source, right? So what were you to do?
Yeah, National Science Foundation is where all the money comes from. And I probably could have still kept doing my research, but usually when you finish your research, you become something like a postdoc. And as a postdoc, you make a little bit, like a doctorate student at the time made $13,500 a year. So I was living off 13,500, but I got all my tuition and I got the coolest toys you could ever have, right? It's like, so it's kind of nerd heaven. So when you become a postdoc, you probably make twice as much money, and you have like two PhD students assigned to you, right? And so they're kind of your grunt work, and y'all work together, but you're kind of the slave of or indentured servant to a full professor, right?
Mm.
And so you do that for a few years, and then you hope to get this next thing up the ladder. And it's sort of that deal that I was headed toward.
You weren't, so you were somewhat tempted to work in academia then.
Right. I think that's where most people with the PhD in physics would work in academia, and they would teach because they had to, and they do their research because they got to. You know what I mean? That's sort of what you do. You go play with these cool toys that the government helps you buy and build. You test this stuff. Occasionally you come up with like real cool stuff. Like, people don't realize it. Like, if you go into the hospital and you get an MRI, all of the superconductors that are built for that actually came from outside Chicago when they were building the first nuclear accelerators out there. So nuclear accelerators needed these very, very high fields. So these high fields built at Fermilab created the need for superconductors, which made MRIs possible. So a lot of times the National Science Foundation funding this research gets real cool stuff for everyone to use. It just doesn't come out the way they think it does.
Is the National Science Foundation,
Yeah, it's
how do
government.
yeah, it's a government program and they source their funding through the government. Okay.
Yeah, your taxes, as well as the people working at Walmart and Waffle House, as well as people working at Microsoft, everybody paid a little bit for me. So, and
Good.
right now, and that's sort of how, like on the engineering research, now Georgia Tech, where my son is, they get a lot from big OEs to, from industry also, but from physics, it's pretty much straight government funding.
So for you, this was what, 1989, 87?
This would have been this actually been 92, 93, 94.
Oh,
So
okay.
I got my master's degree in 94.
Gotcha.
So we've been back in the 80s, but right now, by the time when I graduated in 94, and I started at comp in January 95.
Well, before we get to that, I am curious, how you got there, because, you instead of working in academia, you end up going to comp. But it's interesting because you still kind of teach, right? So you have this this really unique ability to digest like complex information, disseminate it, and explain it to the layman like myself using anecdotes and metaphors. And I'm curious, is that because that's how you digest that information, or is that something like a skill that you've developed over, the years?
No, I mean, that really is how I have, it's very easy for me to see things very simply. Now, I can see mathematics and think in mathematics like, you know how people put sentences together when they're doing thoughts in their mind and they think in English? And if you like, I know, ich kann ein bisschen Deutsch gesprochen. I can speak a little bit of German. And German sentence structure is a little different from English sentence structure. And if I try real hard, I can think in German, you know. It's just a little bit different. But there's something that most people that are bilingual can definitely think in two languages. That's not very odd at all.
That's something that I've been curious about for a long time. And I wonder if it's possible to have different personalities in those languages, if that makes sense.
That sounds like a psychological question to me, but if you do that, you probably don't want to tell anybody about it, okay? When they show up with the jacket that ties behind, I don't know what you're talking about. I think in English, and but I guess I was using that sort of as an analogy, the way that a bilingual person can think in two languages. I can think in mathematics just as easily as I can think in English. In fact, I can think in mathematics about many things a lot easier than I can in English. When you get two physicists talking to each other, there's more diagrams and equations written down than there are words said. And it's funny when my kid and I talk, when Connor and I talk, he'll like, well, sketch that out and send me a picture, because we're trying to do it with words and we both stink at words. So we're making little drawings and sending things out and stuff like that. But I do try to understand things in a rough, analogous way first. And then I try to see how can you apply the mathematics to that? And I think that's been a huge advantage, to me through my academic career, was being able to kind of dumb things down and then build them back up, and that's really good for talking to customers about things we're trying to do with their engine and everything. I think it may have been Richard Feynman, but somebody said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it very well.
I think that's a fair summation. That begs the question: how did you end up segueing that academic career into working at Comp?
Okay, so basically, I wound up in Memphis. I was going to go work for one of the two medical places. Something called TennCare came through. So that's a Tennessee care. It's basically like the managed government healthcare program for the state of Tennessee. Well, that made all the hospitals put a hiring freeze because they didn't know how that was going to affect them financially. So now I've left this one, what I thought was a cool job, to go get another cool job. I had two places fighting over me who was going to pay me the most. Then both of them tell me they won't pay me squat. So, that can motivate someone to look at these things. There's these things back in the 90s called newspapers. And they had sections called Help Wanted. And believe it or not, I was looking through the Help Wanted section, and looking in there was a job for the tech line at Competition Campus. Now you have to understand, being a grad student for a couple of years in Florida, I own nothing but shorts and t-shirts or my suits for giving presentations. So I show up magazine in hand at Competition Campus in January in a suit with an overcoat to get a job interview. So a good friend of mine named Chris Brown gave me the first interview. And you wouldn't believe all the questions they gave me trying to figure out if I really was a physicist, because they didn't know any way to do it. And you have to understand, I was a lot sharper. My mind was better then than it is now. I could think quicker then. I could memorize more stuff then. So they didn't know what to do, but they sent me home with a catalog. And they said, show back up, this is like Friday, show back up Monday and we'll have some more questions. So they sent me down Monday, and it may have been Tim Langley was in there with it. They started asking me questions. Well, what would you do for this and that? And I answered pretty well. And they asked something, and they go, well, that's wrong. And the Pontiac doesn't take that rocker arm, it takes this other one. I said, no, look on page 237, right there on the right side of the page, about 2/3 down. And they turned to it, and the catalog was wrong, but I'd memorized. And they were like, holy crap, you know. So
Would you say that?
He looks at me and goes, you memorized the catalog? I'm like, well, not all of it, but, you know, I tried to, you know, I looked at all of it, you know, and they're just like, yeah. So, you know, I got hired. Chris got in trouble for hiring me without a non-compete at first. So, you know, it was funny.
I'm curious though, like, do you consider yourself to have a photographic memory? Is that how you're able to memorize that so quickly? I mean,
I probably did then. I don't now. You know, it's just, I can read faster than most people. You know, I can probably read in a novel maybe 50 pages an hour, you know, which, you know, is pretty fast, but it's not like unheard of fast. But I can remember a lot of what I've read, you know, and that kind of weirds people out.
but when you were,
I tried to do, it's just something that just works, you know.
when you were interviewing with them though, you were, you said you answered an ad in the paper for the tech line, but
Yeah,
it sounds like they were interviewing you a little bit harder than they would normally. What were you interviewing for?
I worked on the tech office for a year, almost for a full year. So I started in January, and I went to Harvey Crane's CAM school in February of the next year. So I worked in the tech office as answering phone calls, 40 hours a week, you know, 8 hours a day. If you called up 1-800-365-9145, there was a 1 in 10 chance you were going to talk to me. And there's even friends like, there's a friend in Washington that state that has a white pickup truck. That was the first time I ever put a -8 globe on somebody's pickup truck. So I was doing custom grinds. I did dumb stuff too. I had like somebody with a 2-barrel inline 6 that he goes, what's the most aggressive cam that I could put in? So I put a NASCAR cam in it because it would work. So it had an XX, like a real live NASCAR cam in a inline 6 Ford 300 or something. But yeah, I did some bad things. I did some good things. The running joke was they fired me from tech and moved me from engineering because I messed up so many people's engines that I'd be safer over here in engineering.
That's hilarious, man. So I guess you kind of cut your teeth in this field, like as far as explaining things to people right there, right, in that year's time frame.
Yeah, it was about a year doing that. I mean, I started dealing with some of the higher end customers toward the 9-month part. You know, they used me for a lot of different things. You know, wherever you had a math problem, or like we had the testing in the back, and we had some noise problems, and so I went back there and helped. One of my good friends now, Thomas Griffin, was running all our testing in the back. We didn't have the Spintron yet. We just had an Optron, and I helped him get that wired up with clean signal and stuff like that. So
that was some time ago, though. When you were
to be a tech guy all throughout 1995. So I did that the whole year of 1995, and a couple months in 96. You know, and you know, to do that, I got some of the coolest other jobs where it was measuring cams, whether it was oddball stuff. There used to be this race where the Great American Race, they took like 1920 cords and things like that, and did all these old 20s cars and raced them from coast to coast or something. And I got involved in all that, and I got to do a lot of fun stuff. So they let me do, even though I was a tech guy, you know, I got some preferential treatment. It was kind of fun.
That's awesome.
Really fun.
So how has your position transformed over the years into what you do now?
Oh, it's funny because if you really looked at it, like if my LinkedIn would say it hadn't changed much at all, because in 96, I moved over to cam design because we needed somebody to do the Briggs cams. And the guy who was over cam design at Comp, as soon as I started, probably within 6 weeks of me being in engineering, he quit and said he'd do consulting work. And my boss, being a little bit prideful, said, never mind, we don't need you for consulting work, and just promoted me into his position. So I'm 25 years old, a year out of getting my master's degree, year and a half, as green as could be. And I don't know what you think about when you think about a 25-year-old, but they're not very mature and there's no wisdom there. Lots of horsepower, little bitty, skinny, no traction tires. And Scooter's like, I remember him, Scooter Brothers ran R&D. He's one of the two owners of Comp Games, or was one until they sold it. So Scooter, like, it was like, imagine somebody having a split window Corvette and telling their 16-year-old son, here's the keys for prom, son. Just don't wreck it. He'd go out of town and he was like, Billy, I've got to have a cam design, but you don't have to design anything. You don't even have to come to work. Just don't mess anything up. And so that was just super cool. But I got to work with some of the neatest people, like right off the bat. I was dealing with Steve Schmidt when he had like 10 or 12 of the pro stock field on any given weekend for HRA. A couple years before I was at Comp, one of Scooter's friends had sent his son over to Comp Cams to kind of learn the business side of it. And so he wound up calling up and working with me, and his name's Doug Yates. Robert had sent Doug to work with Scooter. And so Doug and Billy were people hadn't heard of at the time, so we're like both in our 20s, we're messing around, we're loving engines, we're playing with stuff, and didn't even know that we were doing, probably had cars on the front row at Daytona and never really realized we did a big deal. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, this is just what we do. We get to play with engines. Look, this makes more power. Hey, it's winning a race, but
I'm curious now that you've been doing this for quite a while. When you look back over your career, what are some of the more notable vehicles that you've had a hand in designing camshafts for, just off the top of your head?
We've done just super neat things. We've done parts for the CIA when they were doing some fuel cell pumps. We've done different things from everything from like weed eaters to primary movers, big ships that go across the ocean. On the race car side of it, when Dale Earnhardt won the Daytona 500 after so many times, and playing just a tiny role in that, because that had a really cool camshaft in it, playing a tiny role in that, and him finally getting that bear off his back. Winningest driver in ever at Daytona, hadn't ever won the Daytona 500. When he won, it was amazing. The first championship I had anything to do with was Dale Jarrett with the 88 car. The first NASCAR win I had anything to do with it was the 2 car Rusty Wallace at Richmond. And that was, to my best of my knowledge, that was the first 2-to-1, high rocker ratio engine to win a cup race in an open race. It happened before in the restrictor plate, but never on the open. Richmond's an open track. And not only did he win the race, but he spun the car out midway, went to the back and passed everybody and won that race. So it was when Mike Egge was building the engines for Penske at the time.
That's really cool. I mean, you were involved in motorsports in like the heyday of NASCAR. Like, well, that's arguable, but like when some of the most.
I couldn't have picked a better time. I mean, I came at a super neat time because by this time Smokey Yunick wasn't building engines, but he came to Comp to visit when I was there. So the Garlets and the Smokies were just sort of going off into the sunset. But I got to work with Ernie Elliott, who was a childhood hero, Bill Jenkins, Bob Glidden, Steve Schmidt, John Lingenfelter was a close friend and just amazing mentor of mine. Ed Pink's about to turn 90 and he'd say he's a kid, but getting to hang out with Ed Pink and get to know, like I told you about the guys, that interview I did at ATC, when Keith Dorton and Sonny Leonard and John Kazi and Ed Pink are up there on stage and I'm asking them questions, I'm not asking questions, even though all these guys are a generation older than me, I'm asking questions to my friends. And I don't think I could have come around on any time in motorsports and been able to bridge that generation so that those guys are my friends. And yet I'm equally close with these young 20 and 25, 30-year-old engineers who are just coming up into this industry. And I love every bit of it.
Yeah. What gets you excited about working in this industry now?
One is just the technology keeps exploding. You know, every time we think we know, we don't. Every time we think we've gotten there, with a valvetrain, such a system that if the spring changes, if the rocker changes, if everything gets stiffer, whenever anything changes, you get to re-optimize the system. So it's like the everlasting gobstopper of mathematical equations. You know, it's a differential equation, but it's a very, very complex driven differential equation that you're solving mathematically. And understanding what knobs you're turning and how that works, how each part component changes things, how dampening changes things. It's really, really neat from a mathematical side. It's also amazing from a personality side. You know, I talked about my older friends, but seeing the younger guys start to grab it and get in. You know, we have probably 20 engineers with comp cams in Edelbrock. And when the younger guys start getting excited about it and seeing new things, and they're really pushing the technology and they're making everything better, that's just the coolest deal ever. To see, I've gotten to have huge successes. To see the next generation have huge successes, that's just cool. You know, that's fun. So I'm loving that part of it.
Do you see those guys as living in the same spirit that you had when you first got into it, a little bit rebellious, having a lot of fun, or are they a little bit more like, for lack of a better word, like nerdy, you know, science kind of guys?
Oh, they'd all tell you that I'm the biggest nerd. So they'd also tell you I'm the biggest rebel. But you know that nerdiness and rebelliousness, I mean, probably about a third of engineers are like that. You know, just hate rules and go against the grain whenever they get a chance. These guys are just awesome. Each one of them is an individual. They're hard to categorize. You know, I think that they are probably more trained by their schools to try to make money right off the bat. You know, like nobody ever tried to tell us, worry about how much money you can make. You know, it's just like, you know, see if you can get enough to eat and, you know, play with cool stuff. You know, we competed, we were more worried about our budget, how much government money we got to spend than how much we got to keep, you know? So, you know, it's something, if you ever saw that movie, Real Genius, you know, where they had all the cool toys, you could look at Val Kilmer movie, old one, but they had cool toys. I guess I grew up more the cool toy and I get paid. And these guys are a little bit more, in general, a little bit more worried
you think
about.
it's because there's less new stuff to discover?
Maybe they feel that way. It may just be student debt too, you know, because schools were probably cheaper to go to school when I was in school than that. But that's probably the only difference. And it's not all the way across. Trust me, they're not doing wrong by doing that, but that's the only thing I'd say different, you know. And of course, looking back, one of the times Thomas and I bet each other a milkshake who made the least, you know, back in the 90s, probably like 96 or 97. Like, they pay you less than me. No, they pay me less than you. And, you know, like that. Well, I built you a milkshake that, you know, it turned out I think I had to pay him the milkshake. And I think that after the milkshake, that if you put both the milkshakes, that he should have owed me the milkshake back. Because it's virtually the same. You know, it's like, so I don't know. Maybe I see that. But really, there's that spirit of, you've heard that song Copperhead Road where they talks about, you know, I still remember that rumbling sound.
Yeah.
You know, when an internal combustion cranks up and you hear that music, and then you hear it get loaded on the dyno, and you hear it turn some RPM, and you watch the needle go up, and you can feel the air coming out of the room. You can feel the shake in the concrete. Man, once you get that, if you're addicted to that, there is no drug on earth that's as good. You know, that you want that so much. And that's just as true today in 2020 as it was in 95 or 98 or 2000.
That's definitely more what I was getting at. Like, are these guys into motorsports, or are they more into the science behind, camshaft technology and things like that?
No, it's one of the coolest things that Matt Patrick is over all our research and development department. So he does all the hiring interviews. And I hope I'm not giving too much away. But if you want to work as an engineer at Comp Cams, you better have some sort of internal combustion related toy that you are passionate about. It can be a motorcycle. He won't get upset about that. It can be anything, but it better have spark plugs on it. It better be an engine, because if you don't have that passion for our motorsport side of things, you're probably not going to be a good fit. So
Noted.
Everybody, I mean, like half of us do some sort of autocross or road race stuff, and the other half of us probably do some sort of drag race. We've got motorcycle guys too. So, but I mean, we're into this stuff.
Billy, I do want to get into that, and that's a perfect lead into my next question. But you were touching on something a moment ago, and I don't want to lose this train of thought. And the answer is probably subjective, but is there a perfect camshaft for a specific application? Like, I know that mathematics deals in absolutes, sort of. So is there a perfect camshaft that can be made for a particular application?
That's a far better question than you might think. I'll give you some, for instance, most of the time on the street, you've actually got a whole lot of where you're trying to figure out what somebody's goals are, and you're tailoring the camshaft like you'd tailor a suit. The camshaft is called the heart or mind of performance engine. That's because the valve events really determine, like a conductor on a symphony, like a coach on a football team. He calls the plays. He doesn't really do anything but tells everything else what to do. The camshaft ties together by opening and closing the valves. It ties together the intake track and the exhaust track. It makes this whole wave tuning of the intake track, the exhaust track, and the piston going up and down. It makes all that work together. And because it's doing that, it can tailor the torque curve shape dramatically, much more so than any other single component in the engine. So if somebody calls up and they're more wanting a sound, we may put a different cam than if, hey, I want this thing to really be explosive down low. So that's on the street. You're doing a lot of that. Then you get onto the race side, and then all of a sudden, like you'll hear comments like every cam's a turbo cam or every cam's a blower cam. And I don't think people realize the reason why we changed the cam specs, like for a blower, is on a positive displacement blower. The blower will make boost at very, very low RPM. It's going to force air into the engine. So it generally makes a torque curve that's very, very cheated up on the bottom end. So we may spread the lobe separation out or put more exhaust duration in on certain blower combinations, not because that makes the average power any better or average torque any better. It actually makes the average a little less, but it might give up 30 foot-pounds down low that you couldn't hook up for 10 or 15 foot-pounds up top that you can hook up. Mm-hmm. So you're almost tailoring the torque curve for the traction limits of the car. And nowhere does that come more important than, say, a World of Outlaw sprint car. Like, I could make the perfect cam for that engine, and mathematically that's probably easier than you would think. But what if the track is really tacky and all the passing is coming out of the corners, being able to dive down low in the corner? The only way to pass is to be able to dive down out of the high line and pull somebody from the bottom, get a run, dive down, lug the engine, pull them out. So then having more torque down low where you might not be every lap is more important than having the power up high, because to keep the engine high RPM, that's a place on the track you can't get around.
Makes sense.
So
what
there's
if
some real tactical things about tailoring the camshaft for the driver, for the engine, for the application, for the racing surface that are far more complex and can ever be solved perfectly and always be right.
What does the math look like if you could control all those variables, right? Like to make something like a perfect combination. What does that look like?
Well, it just depends on because there's so many things. Like the closest thing we've ever had to being able to make a perfect cam was Engine Masters. When they did the Engine Masters competition, they did that average power from 3,500 to 7,000 or 3,000, 7,000 or 3,000, 6,000, changed year from year. But on that, there was a perfect camshaft. You know what I mean? Because you could know what you're giving up, when you change exhaust opening. So if you just look at the 4 points, you got exhaust opening, intake closing, exhaust opening, exhaust closing, and intake closing. So those are your 4 events time-based. If you move the exhaust opening early, every time you move the exhaust opening early, you give the engine more time to get the exhaust out while it's around bottom dead center. So that frees up some pumping losses, exhaust pumping losses and high RPM. But it also, as soon as you open the exhaust valve, you've stopped the power stroke. When the piston's coming down and you have that power stroke, that's stopped. So you always know that wherever you put exhaust opening, if you move it earlier, it's going to help the top but hurt the bottom. If you move it later, you're going to hurt the bottom but help the top. That compromise between which way you move it can be very, very, in any type of racing, it's dependent on suspension and the traction and how the driver, in circle track or road course, it'd be how the driver wants to drive it. So you could have the exact same car on the exact same course with 2 different drivers, and they would need 2 different camshafts to be the best they could be. And sometimes it's not intuitive. Like you would think that, like I'm not a very good road course driver. I love doing it, but I know I'm not very good at it. I'll cheat my camshaft a little bit big to take some bottom out of it so I don't turn the car around backwards coming out of the corners, because sometimes I'm stupid and just want to stick my foot into it, right? I forget there's a throttle pedal, not a throttle button. Oh, hold on, I'm drifting, I'm not driving. So if you make the cam tube exhaust, you move that exhaust opening, I can take some bite out of the engine and make it drive off the corner, be a little bit more sluggish so it doesn't blow the tires off coming out of the corner. So there's just a tremendous amount of tailoring that you can do in the camshaft, which, because you'll see these computer programs, they'll select the perfect camshaft and everything like that. I don't know how to add that. I know how to ask those questions. I don't know how to add that to a program. You know what I mean? How do I add to the thing is, are you a dummy who's likely to spin your car out coming out of the corner? There's some nice ways to ask that without being terribly direct. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier that, if you're going to work at comp, you better be into some type of motorsports. And you just touched on it right now. You do a little bit of racing yourself. What does the physicist hot rodder do in his spare time?
Well, I always have a couple of toys. Right now, my daily driver is just totally the least cool Focus ever, go back and forth to work with. But, I have a truck I've had since 2007 or something like that, Dodge, pickup, but it's got a, 416-ish inch Hemi Eagle heads. MMX did the engine build on it, got one of our camshafts in it. It's just snotty and crazy, makes 450 horsepower to the wheels. So you can imagine this old dented up looking, gold farm truck, that can just about blow the tires off at any time. So that's fun, but that's my toy. My race car, which is even more of a toy, is a 94 BMW E36 convertible.
Oh, cool.
I said I was never going to buy a convertible and I was never going to buy an automatic. One of my best friends wound up selling it. He's like, hey, I bought a new car. I can't have both cars in the driveway when my wife gets back from her trip out of town. He goes, I'm going to sell this BMW for $500. I said, don't sell that car for $500. He goes, yeah, I think I'm going to. I said, well, if you're going to sell it for $500, I'll be there. This is like on Friday. I said, I'll be there at 8:00 in the morning with $500. Does the car crank? He goes, I hadn't tried in a few years. So I showed up with my son and booster cables and an air pump and $500, and I bought the car. On the way home, the front wheel was jumping off the ground. It was so square, and the shocks were totally shot. But we took that, we tore it all the way down, put all new suspension in it, put a roll cage, stripped out the interior, put a roll cage in it, ran it a few months with the ran it one summer with the V6 in it, inline 6 in it, and then we took that out. Now it has it's had 3 or 4 LSs in it.
Yeah.
And so now it's got a Jericho behind it. So it's a 4-speed NASCAR Jericho.
Hell yeah.
Dude, it is so much fun. We'll go out to the Porsche Club, and for a few laps, if I don't hurt it too bad and don't kick the tires, it'll keep up with some, those guys have Porsche GT3s and stuff, and it'll keep up with pretty much anything out there. SLR Mercedes and Porsche GT3s in my poo box, E36. It's so funny. People will come up and go, what do you have in that thing? Because it runs down the straight, it runs, 160 or so.
Well, it sounds like you got that car just because it was available and you got it from a buddy, but is that a car that you would have sought out to build for that application specifically? Does it lend itself?
I was really big. I wanted to do chump car at the time, and before somebody just killed the rules, they had a thing about chump car rules had it where on brakes, you could spend twice as much as the stock brakes. So you can imagine that, like, if you bought a Fox body Mustang, twice as much as a Fox body Mustang is like $400 on brakes, right? But if you have an E36 BMW, now you've got a $5,000 brake budget, right? Because you could buy anything in the Willwood catalog, no problem at retail, and still not beat their brake rule. They also used to have a rule, and they've changed it. It was price of engine and transmission out versus price of engine and transmission in. So as you can guess, believe it or not, a 5.3 liter GM truck motor costs less than a BMW inline 6. So it's like, watch this. And we made, because Comp and TCI are sister companies, we had a really, really nice manual foul body 4L60 in there and everything like that. So we had all kinds of cool stuff just to murder the chump car rules. But after a while, somebody beat me to it, put like a small block Chevy in a Miata and lapped the field by 6 times. They started doing horsepower in and horsepower out. So now I'm in the experimental classes. But I built it to kill I built that car particularly because I knew it would just murder the rules in a certain class. But honestly, after having it, it's so much fun.
Oh, I bet it's a rocket ship, I'm sure. What other parts of engineering do you get to explore with that car while you're road racing outside of valve train technology, of course?
It lets me, I try not to do too much on suspension because I know I'm not good at it, but it's really given me and my son a lot of times to look at chassis stiffness, suspension, aerodynamics. Like I did, I built the back wing for it, plywood wing, because this is supposed to be a $500 car, right? So one of my good friends is Chuck Jinks at he's at University of, he was at North Carolina State, a professor there. I think he's at University of North Carolina Charlotte now, or I forget what they call the school, but he was the chief aerodynamicist for Haas F1 team for years.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine me working on a splitter and a wing, and the guy that's helping me come up with all the forms for it and everything like that is literally the chief aerodynamicist on a current F1 team. So to say that, probably the math that went into my aero is a little bit stronger than the math that goes into most $500 race car aeros, that's probably a fair statement. Even though people make fun of me because the big splitter on it, they're like, it's made out of like birch plywood, so it's probably weighs 20 pounds, and people are joking about, you might have downforce, but you got weight. It's like, okay. But you can stand on my splitter, so that's kind of nice. You know, me and you both can stand on the bill, and it wouldn't break it off. So.
Hey, you mentioned that this is a project that you work on with your son, and that he's also, a student of your area of study. Is he kind of like following in your footsteps?
Yeah, he's a little bit. His is a little bit different. You know, I give Gail Banks grief about it because my son's a diesel geek. You know, as far as in all his research. You know, he studies ducted diesel jets, and so his is all in compression ignition engines, and so they have these things where they squirt high pressure diesel through a jet, and it creates less soot, and so his research is mostly on reducing emissions in diesel applications. You know, where mine is more about increasing the emissions in gasoline applications. But other than he's diesel and he's trying to save the planet, and I'm gasoline and I'm trying to burn as many hydrocarbons as I can. Yeah.
Well, you got to offset, right?
Right. I think he thinks he's doing penance for me. Yeah.
Well, but still, like, it sounds like this is something that you guys bond over. You guys
absolutely
share drive time.
Oh yeah, that's a major thing. He's, usually when we go out there, typically he's a lot more consistent than I am. It's exactly the opposite that you would expect, right? He makes very consistent laps. His average laps are always better than my average laps. I generally go 4 off once or twice a weekend when I go out. So I I miss a turn and here goes the BMW out through the field or something. He's never been off track. He's never spun the car out, anything like that, where I do that all the time. But generally, I'll wind up with like some glory lap or glory, time that there's like, I'll have the fastest time by, a few thousandths of a second, but my average is lousy. But I can always say, yeah, I'm faster than you. And he's like, you're not faster than me. You just, every now and then you do something.
Yeah.
We share a lot of seat time and get out there. That's one of the fun things, I have my 3 kids, my wife has 2, I have 3, so we have 5. My oldest son and I, we used to like to do a lot of camping and everything together. Now he's got a son, and so I hang out with Will and his son Liam, and they're awesome, and I think the world of it. Now he is definitely the hands-on type. He's got his master's certificate in plumbing. He's got his journeyman. He's working on his master's. He'll probably own a business here in a few years. He's like this super tradesman. My daughter, youngest, we hang out, we go backpacking and hiking together. We do different things. She's working toward her law degree, and we talk about everything. My middle child, Connor, he's the one that got the math gene. He's the one that does the hot rod stuff. And so we do the more playing together with our natural stuff, like I don't have to think about law school and stuff. And, and my daughter just looks at us when we talk, and she's brilliant, but she hates mathematics, and it's just so funny. We're over here, and she's just like,
have you found it difficult to turn that part of your brain off? Like when you're talking to people who, haven't the first clue about your level of math and comprehension?
It's a weird deal because I guess me and my wife, and we're together all the time. I think she's just awesome, and she's not into math or science. She's into science, but not the mathematical side of it. And so we get along great. It is fun being around the few people who are just total geeks. I have a few in the industry that PhD level engineers, and being around people that are that can do that stuff, it's just sort of a fun deal because then you can just let all the throttle. It's like taking the rev limiter chip out and going and making a couple passes. It's kind of fun.
Well, Billy, what projects are you currently working on that you can talk about? And what can you tell us about what you're currently working on?
We just finished up on the HRT Hemi blower cams, and so cool. Those are coming out for SEMA, And that deal, I tell you what, that thing, like I told you, I have that Dodge truck, right? You know, I can't put one of these Edelbrock blowers on my Dodge truck because I know I'll blow the rear end of the transmission or do something bad with it. But you just cannot imagine how easy it was to make 900 horsepower. You know, this thing, yeah, you take a just
And that's a
six.
Gen 3 Hemi 5.7 out of a '07 pickup truck.
If you take the 6.4 motor out of the SRT, if you get one of those engines and you change the piston out, because it has a real thin top ring for emissions. So if you change the piston out to like a Mala piston, put an ICER piston in it, and then go in there, and you don't really have to change the rod, but why not while you're already changing the piston? But go ahead, change the piston rod, put that blower on there, put the camshaft on there, and all of a sudden you've got something that's as docile as could be, but makes 900 plus horsepower like it's falling out of a tree. With the 5.7, you'd probably be 700, 800 easy. I forgot.
That's it.
we did the 5.7 with both heads, and it was impressive.
Hey,
But
that's something that Greg and I were just talking about, man. Is it possible? Do they share the same block? Can you turn a 5.7 into a 6.1 or a 6.4?
No, they've all got a little bit different blocks. The 6.1 and 5.7 I think are closer, just a little bit of bore deal. But it's a little bit more bore with the 6.4. So you can't just go back and forth. But even that 5.7, that Eagle, the new with the race port better deal, that's what's on my truck motor. My truck motor is a 5.7 with the 4-inch stroke on it. So that thing's just amazing. And those with the blower are just, I don't know. I've just, the more, we did about a couple years of testing the LSs. I was just absolutely shocked how good those were in A. Then we did that with the turbo, and I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And then we went and did the Dodge, and with the Dodge with the turbo, then with the Dodge with the blower, and I'm like, man, this is way simpler than with the turbo system. And I'm like, this thing is just wicked. And now we're starting to do the same thing with the GM with the blower side. And I'm just telling you that all of these motors, I'm just, I grew up in a world where 500 horsepower was a lot.
Yeah.
And these days, approaching a 4-digit horsepower, it doesn't take much to do it. And it is easy to make 800 horsepower. Easy with that Dodge, that dual plug Dodge, the 2650 Edelbrock blower to make 900 horsepower. I mean, just like ridiculously easy. And that's kind of cool. I kind of like to think of myself as a race engine guy who does the street stuff because I have to. But some of the street stuff is just really, really cool.
I agree.
So that's been awesome. Clearly, all the race stuff we get to be involved with, a lot of that is doing consulting work and working very closely with different race teams. We don't get to talk about that much, but that's just as cool as anything I do in my day job. So that's a lot of fun too.
You mentioned that blower cam, though, it's gearing up for SEMA. So is that already, can people view that on the website, or is that something that you guys are going to launch?
That cam is a part number, and I'm doing this off the top of my head. So if I do this wrong, you guys don't stone me or anything, but I think it's a part number 201-337-17. And it might be -13 at the end. I forget what they call it, -13, -17, but a 201, there's 201-335 is the smallest, 201-335-13 or 17, and 201-337-13 or 17 is the big one. And those things, the bigger cam with the 6.4 and the big blower was my favorite combination. Now, clearly, the 5.7 wasn't 100 horsepower down, so it's not like it was bad, but man, the 6.4 was just cool.
So is that already available like on the site in the catalog and everything? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Right. If you just type in comp HRT blower, it would come right up.
Okay, perfect.
And there should be, by the time SEMA runs around, there should be like dyno sheets online and everything like that where we show what we did.
Billy, if people like want to get a hold of you and pick your brain about tech, how can they get a hold of you? What trade shows, virtually or in person, are you planning on being at, and how can they speak with you?
Well, we're doing we're going to do that next virtual trade show. Greg knew the name of it. I just totally drawn a blank right now, but I will be doing that one around PRI. It's a shame that I won't be in the booth at PRI, that we're not doing that this year. In future years, I'm always there. One of the things is that if anybody's ever dealing with any of the salesmen or tech guys at Comp, and clearly we talked about it, I started in the tech office. I do not look down on those guys. They are tremendous. But if they ever have anything that they want me to run it by Billy or see what I think about something, literally, I'm good friends with almost all of our salesmen at Comp Camps. We are tight. I will help them in any way. I generally like dealing with customers with a spotter, like a salesman spotter, not because I'm so snobby that I don't want to talk to somebody, but because there's a good chance that somebody wants to talk to me, they have something fairly interesting to talk about. And I'd love for one of our salesmen to be involved, because they may learn something from our customers. The neatest thing we have in this industry is we probably learn more from our customers over the years than we teach. So the thing is by having all these relationships, I'd like our sales guys to be in the middle of that.
Man, that's awesome, Billy. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, man. Before we kind of wrap things up here, do you have any parting shots, any shout outs that you want to give, any last thoughts?
No, just know that I appreciate it. It's interesting to think back. Sometimes I love giving tours around Comp Cams, because it gives me that chance to step back and view where we were and where we're going and why we do this. And I just want to thank you for tonight, you and Greg, for having me on tonight, because sometimes it's nice for me to go back and down memory lane to think about where we are, where we were, where we're going, why do we do this? And, the truth of it is that we're some of the most fortunate people in the world. We're like Peter Pan. We don't have to grow up and get a real job. As the same kid who was going across that lake backwards, beating on that 2 horsepower Evinrude, trying to get it to go just a little bit faster, is still beating on stuff today. And, have been able to make a real nice career out of it, raise a family, and have a lot of cool things. And a lot of people that I'm mentoring today. It's kind of neat. It's really fun. And if people ever stop being interested in this, then we've got to all grow up and design boxes. I assure you, you don't want to be going across a bridge that I designed, because I'm going to wonder if I do this.
Man, Billy, I couldn't agree more, man. You hit the nail on the head. I feel so fortunate to be able to do this for a living. Every guest I have on the show, I learn so much from them, and I'm really lucky that I get to speak with somebody like you and the rest of our guests. So thank you so much again, from the bottom of my heart, man.
And if you guys ever need anything, reach out anytime. You don't have to have me on to ask a question or whatever. I'm always glad to try to help. Okay.
Well, you know what? I got to tell you, I kind of hope that in the future we can do that. Maybe call you as an expert, or maybe we can take you up on that tour, and we can shoot an episode live over there at Comp.
And we would love to show you around Comp Cam. So whenever you guys get ready to travel, come on down. We got to wear masks now. But I look better with a mask on. So maybe it's not bad.
All right, brother. Well, thanks again. We will talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Billy Godbold. Huge shout out to him and the whole Comp Cams crew. Thank you for coming through, man, and dropping some knowledge on us. Again, this time, some personal history and stuff, which I thought was really cool, because as soon as he touched on his background last episode, I was like, we got to have this guy back. I got to know more.
Plus he's funny.
Yeah. He's very personable. Thank you for facilitating that, Greg.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, but seriously, like asking him if he was an English as a second language student.
Yeah, it's hilarious, dude. Yeah. But I mean, he's a very funny guy, super knowledgeable, really intelligent. And he's into motorsports, which is totally cool, which is the reason that we're all here. So we can combine all those things. Well, you got one hell of a guest. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode.
And he will be presenting at the Engine Performance Expo on January 7th through 9th. It's a digital.
Yeah, that's
deal.
a short time after PRI, right?
Yeah. Check Engine Labs. We're actually the official digital media sponsor for it. That actually, I probably shouldn't say that. I don't know if that's going to be announced by then, but it's a really cool deal. It's going to be all online, all free. We already have one article up about it, but
very cool, man.
Yeah, so he's gonna
That's
be
dope.
there.
What can people expect from that trade show?
Oh man, if anybody's familiar with the old AETC, which was the Advanced Engineering Trade Conference, I think I'm saying that right. It was right before PRI. It was a lot of engine building stuff, and it's kind of, I don't want to say hearkening to that because that kind of sounds like it's not replacing it. I mean, even though it's not around anymore, it's a good technical conference. I mean, it's 3 days of guest lectures from some amazing names from the industry. It's some hands-on. Sorry, digital. How can it be hands-on? I know, but it actually is as best as possible through digital format. A hands-on how-tos with some machining stuff, some processes. And then just some roundtables with some of the industry's big names. So you get to hear them play off each other, and some Q&A sessions, like where anybody that's there can actually ask whatever's on their mind.
Very cool, man.
It's not in person, obviously.
But if it's digital, I mean, it'll give our viewers and listeners and fans a chance to connect with Billy if they were intrigued by anything he said on this episode, and a bunch of other experts in the industry. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a cool setup, and it definitely fills a void in the market, not just because of 2020.
Right. Very cool, man. So I guess you kind of touched on it just a moment ago, but what do you have going on Engine Labs, brother?
Oh man,
I know we're getting further and further ahead, so it's more difficult for us to kind of forecast what's going to be up on the site. But do your best.
Well, by the time this goes, we're probably going to be getting into SEMA 360, and I mean, as well as I do, they're going all out to make this something special. They really want to bring value to the industry in what is a very hard time for the industry.
You know what? Now that you're mentioning that, Greg, maybe we need to have somebody on from the SEMA camp to talk about how they're managing this and what they're doing for the enthusiasts, and not only the enthusiasts, but manufacturers and the media alike.
That would be a very good idea. I like that.
Yeah. So if you guys want to see something like that, drop us a comment in the comment section and let us know, who we should talk to and what we should talk about. So cool, man. On Street Muscle, by the time this airs, well, it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to forecast, but go ahead and go check out the latest edition of Rare Rides. Rob Finkelman, you guys know him. We had him on an episode, maybe 10, 15 episodes back. And he is staff for Street Muscle. He does an amazing job doing Rob's car movie review, Rob's Movie Muscle, and Rare Rides. So the latest edition of Rare Rides covers the 1969 Chevy Camaro Copo ZL1, an uber rare car, as the name implies. He does a deep dive into the minutia of what makes that car so rare and valuable and sought after. So go ahead and check that out. I know all you Camaro fans will like it, and people who are just into muscle cars will like it too. So there you go. You said
Uber. How would you react if literally, I mean, even any muscle car, not even ZL1, but let's just say any muscle car pulled up as your Uber? How cool would that be?
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome. So the Daily Camaro, as you know, we've talked about it a few times. The Daily Camaro, one of the project cars on Street Muscle, it's 2010 Camaro SS. I thought about that a while back because I had to take a Uber or a Lyft somewhere, and I was like, I wonder if I could do this in my Camaro. And I thought that would be really cool, especially like if you needed to pull up somewhere and kind of make a statement. I don't know.
Well, here's my thought. Let's go a step further. Let's start like a gearhead Uber. So you don't get, somebody who's like, oh, this car is loud. Oh, it smells like exhaust. Let's what you're getting, and you're like, come on, GT500, come on, GT500.
I think they have to. Yeah, I think they have to meet certain safety standards, which a lot of.
Well, if we're starting our own company.
Yeah, that would be a huge reliability. Our insurance would probably be through the roof. I don't know, man. I don't know if that's practical.
Insurance.
Yeah, provide your own insurance. If you're gonna have a membership, then you have to provide your own insurance, I guess.
You're just betting that something bad is going to happen if you have insurance. You need to have more confidence in yourself.
Every driver will be issued a sticker that says, "No airbags. We die like real men and women."
Seriously, if somebody wants to steal that idea, I wholeheartedly hand it to you. With the only return compensation is maybe a couple free rides.
Yeah,
that would be cool. Really cool. That would be really cool.
Yeah,
like
I've
been
hot
rod Uber.
Sketchy cars. Not all of them owned by me, but some of them. But anyways, yeah. So new business ventures aside, Greg. This episode was fantastic. If you guys liked this episode, please drop us a like, a comment, a subscribe. That comment section is wild. You guys are constantly really making funny notes about each episode, probably about me. I don't get to read all of them, but I do read a lot of them. So if you guys want us to take a look, get active in there. And we appreciate you guys. Again, next week, Friday, noon, Pacific Standard Time. As always, we'll see you guys soon. Peace out.